Through a Scottish Prism, the programme that is unapologetically pro-Scottish independence and anti-Westminster rule. Everything we say here is viewed through a Scottish Prism. Brought to you by Barhead Boy.
Hi folks, welcome back to Through a Scottish Prism. I hope you and yours are all well and you've had a great week since we last spoke. I'm joined tonight by two people who have been on the show before. One is Professor Alf Baird, who has been on, and you know, for the last 2 or 3 times we've been sort of taking off. I've been trying to get Alf on to talk about in his role as a maritime business director, as he was, that's what his professorship was in. We're going to talk about ports and ferries today, which are very important. And I'm also delighted to say we're joined by Douglas Chapman, MP of the SNP, the member for Dunfermline and West Fife, who's the spokesman for small business, enterprise and innovation. And I would just welcome them to the show. Techie, can you give me my guests? Thanking you all. Gentlemen, a great pleasure to see you both again. How are you?
Hi, Roddy. I'm very well, yeah. And it's I've been in an occasional contact with Alf as well on online forums and things. So it's nice to hear what he's got to say tonight as well.
Good. Just as I say, I'm really, this is not my specialist subject. Now, if we're talking about Scottish victories in the World Cup qualifiers, now I'd be good in that one, but unfortunately it's not. But it still feels, that also feels unusual. I mean, but great. But what first question I want to ask is maybe direct to you, Douglas. Am I right in assuming that ports like airports and seaports are still a reserved matter? Would that be correct?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's some grey areas in terms of what the Scottish Government can and can't do. But, you know, for example, the UK Government have taken lead on a lot of maritime issues in terms of, I mean, they're trying to push through free ports at the moment, for example. And Scotland have come back through Ivan McKee with their green ports concept. Mm-hmm. So, you know, I think there are some responsibilities that lie with Scottish Government in terms of maritime development, but you know, I think overall maritime law and things like that still remain at Westminster.
So, and Alf, this is of course your specialist subject, and you're I've been reading some of your stuff, and you're a great believer that, you know, not having ports in Scotland is affecting our economy and our trading ability.
Yeah, well, the sad reality is our major estuaries were sold off basically back in 1991 when Sir Malcolm Rifkind was the Transport Secretary, and he introduced the Ports Act and allowed these ports, which were public trusts on the Clyde, Forth and Tay, he allowed them to privatise. And since then, they've had a range of different owners, but they've ended up in basically what we might call offshore equity fund territory. The problem with that is the privatisation didn't include what privatisations around the world usually include, which is commitments to invest. So we've not had any commitments to invest in new ports. So we were sitting on basically Victorian port infrastructure 30 years ago, and we're still sitting on Victorian port infrastructure. So we have the bizarre situation where in Edinburgh, for example, there isn't a modern cruise terminal able to take the biggest cruise ships. Mm-hmm. We don't have proper port facilities, and we're still sending container ships way far inland to Grangemouth, where they would probably much prefer a coastal facility to do the interchange. So we've not had anywhere near the port investment that, for example, other countries have had, like Ireland has had billions of pounds spent on ports. Mm-hmm. And that's also why they've got maybe 8 or 10 ferry services a week to the continent, whereas we've done. And Norway's got new ferry services to the continent as well. They've all got half a dozen or more ferry services to the continent, whereas Scotland's got none. Even the Faroe Islands has got a regular ferry service to the continent. We haven't got one. Yep. So going back to what Douglas was saying, there is a grey area between policy, who's got responsibility, but the fact is that Scotland has had no investment in its major ports for many years, and we don't have a maritime policy. We've not had one since the Darien scheme.
Well, of course, Douglas, you've been championing reopening Rosyth as a terminal and a gateway to Europe. Now, it's a fact of life, whether we like it or not, that there's a finite budget that the Scottish Government has. And from I'm guessing here from what's being said to me, it would take a massive amount of investment to get these, for example, Rosyth fit for purpose, or can it be done within a reasonable amount of money?
Well, I think the latest plan that I've seen has been a 3 service a week route that would go from Rosyth into Zeebrugge. And it's something that's already familiar with the Scottish public, although we've not had that service for a good number of years now. So there's some of the infrastructure that is already still at Rosyth, and the last time of asking, there was quite a considerable amount of public money put into that, improving the infrastructure. As far as I know, some of that infrastructure has been removed, but I don't think it would take very much to put some of that back in place again. But what Alf was talking about is really the crux of the issue. And maybe come back to the ferry service later on. But the crux of the issue, I mean, if I look in my constituency and around the Forth, we've got all the sizable ports from Rosyth to Leith to Burnt Island to Grangemouth. They're all owned by Forth ports, and what the difficulty is there is that where you have a monopoly situation, then there's no sense of competition between any of these ports, so there's no incentive to actually improve the facilities, other than if Forth Ports management think they can make money out of one of the port services. So what they are doing, though, I think, is that they're trying to identify different ports for different purposes. So what's happening at Grangemouth in terms of container traffic, it will continue, and as Alf said, it's probably not ideal that it's quite far inland, if you like. It's another probably about another hour from the likes of the Forth Bridge, for example, up to Grangemouth. We've got renewables being the focus for Leith in the future, and I think Rosyth has taken all the rest of the stuff that's available, maybe some of the more dirty type industries that are coming in, like loose cargo and things like that, salt for our roads that's imported, and so on. So so at least we're in a stage now where some of the ports are being identified for certain purposes, and there's a bit of strategy behind that. But as far as Scotland's concerned, I'm struggling to see any strategic approach to how we deal with maritime traffic, and that's why at the last SNP conference I was asking for a really ambitious maritime policy to be adopted, not just by the SNP but by the Scottish Government, so we can actually start to be a serious maritime nation again, just in the same way as Norway is a serious maritime nation. They've got some big companies involved in moving goods all over the world. They've got some big companies involved in building ships that are not frigates or are not aircraft carriers. There's ordinary run-of-the-mill ships that are required to move goods around the world. So and that goes right down to your leisure craft and things like that, and your ferries and everything else that we should be building in Scotland and making a real industry out of this, just in the same way as we did when I was growing up in the right through from I wasn't growing up in the 1930s, but certainly if you think about Clydeside and you think about other parts of the Scottish industry that were infamous and or famous for their ability to engineer ships and have that maritime prowess, as part of our economy.
Yeah.
And we've sort of lost that, but we need some fresh thinking to bring it all back again.
Yeah, I remember as a child growing up in Glasgow when it was the bells. My mum and dad would open the window so you could hear all the ships on the Clyde, tooting their horn. All those days ago. But we've got some good deep water ports in the west coast. But let me can I just ask you one other question, Douglas, before I come back to Alf? We're talking, the Scottish Government are talking about when the franchise is up with ScotRail or with Abuelo, is it Abello?
Abellio.
Abellio, they're going to probably bring rail back into public ownership. These ports that Alf was alluding to, which are in the hand of financial engineers or private equity companies, or SPIVs, as I prefer to call them. Could we nationalise them, or would that be the reserved matter problem again? No, you can't.
Well, I think the Scottish Parliament probably has powers over, and maybe Alf can correct me on this, but I think it'd be very difficult to actually sort of nationalise, if you like, these existing facilities and the companies who are involved with it, because they're owned all over the world. There's probably some element of or a huge element in terms of Tilbury, for example, huge element of foreign investment in there as well. So it's maybe a bit a dog's dinner to get involved in that. But the difficulty for me is that for example, in the Forth, not only are Forth Ports the port operator, but they're also the port authority, which means that they're virtually policing their own commercial enterprise, which, and I think that's maybe somewhere where the Scottish Government could at least look at the possibility of re-establishing what is the port authority for the Forth. And I'd imagine that the same might be appropriate in the Clyde and Tayside as well. And again, Forth Ports own Dundee. So, they've got a stranglehold over the port facilities themselves. But is there any regulatory things we could introduce as a government in Scotland that actually puts the power back in the hands of the Scottish citizens, rather than being decided upon by fairly faceless people who have put a lot of money in and what they are expecting is just a return on their cash? They have no. Maybe I'm being unkind, but I don't think they've got any long-term strategic vision of what Scotland needs or requires in terms of maritime policy.
No, private equity companies don't. It's only all about the show me the money. Could I ask you, Alf? You're a great believer, actually, that we should open new ports. If I'm correct, I read something you think that with the Cockenzie power station would be an ideal site for opening a new port and developing ports from scratch.
Yeah, well, I should mention that back in the 90s, when I was first doing the EU projects on developing a ferry service to the continent, that led to the tender to get the superfast service into Rosyth. But the preference at the time in the 90s was to develop a new port further downstream towards the open sea. And that was Cockenzie, and it was first discussed, and I actually did some research for Scottish Power with some maritime experts back in the 90s. And we found that was the best location for a new cruise and ferry terminal on the Forth. It avoided the need for the ferries to go way upriver under the bridges. And the bridges is an air draft constraint. The biggest cruise ferries can't get anywhere near under the bridges. And not that they want to. The other thing about ferries is they want a fast turnaround, and that would save an hour each way, which is actually equivalent to the profit margin. So, what you would do is develop a port at Cockenzie. Unfortunately, Cockenzie in the 90s got an extension of its life for another decade. So it didn't become available. And at the same time, Rosyth became available when the Navy went down to Portsmouth and disappeared and took the subs and everything to Devonport. So Rosyth was left empty, and there was a political imperative to do something. So that's why Superfast went to Rosyth. And I actually did the funding application to the European Commission for support for the ferry terminal there, that got the money for the ferry terminal. And we ran the tender and selected Superfast for the service through Scottish Enterprise. And that worked really well. It was only stopped after about 5 or 6 years because Superfast told me it stopped because the port charges kept on increasing. So Forth Ports, the private equity group that owned Rosyth, they were basically given Rosyth for next to nothing after the Navy left. Eventually they took ownership. So they had the port, and they were increasing the charges quite often. The other thing that made Superfast pull the plug was they didn't have enough land area for trailer storage at Rosyth. So as well as having to go upstream, as well as having to pay a lot more, they didn't have enough space there. They could make a lot more money sending their ships to the Baltic or to the Mediterranean. And that's exactly what they did. So we didn't contract that service as well as we could have, but we didn't have the optimal port facility. Now, Rosyth, Cockenzie has become available in the last decade. The power station has been demolished. It's all flattened. The council have actually bought it off Iberdrola. So the council, East Lothian Council, now own Cockenzie. And it's the only site on the Forth that you could build a modern gateway seaport. There's no other sites with all planning constraints and environmental issues on all other sites. There's no other site you can do this at. So in my view, that's the site that should be done. And in terms of a maritime policy on this, Roy Peterson, who was a former SNP councillor for Inverness and head of transport for Highlands Enterprise, he and I were commissioned by the SNP Westminster Group about 3 years ago to do a maritime policy for Scotland. And we did that maritime policy, and it included these strategic port developments and also reinstating public port authorities for the Forth, Clyde and Tay. Not nationalising the ports, because a lot of the port land is obsolete, Roddy. It's no good for modern shipping. We need new ports. We've not had port investment really since Victorian times in commercial seaports. We've not had that investment in any significant way. So we need to start again in a sense, but it's not that difficult. We've actually got a big facility at Cockenzie, a couple of 100 acres, with rail terminal, bunded area. A little pier there wouldn't cost a great deal. And
what kind of money ballpark are we talking about here?
Probably under 100 million.
Yeah.
That's 2 Calmac ferries if they ever get built.
So I've got to do 2 nights on a Sunday to earn that kind of money.
In shipping terms, it's 1 container ship. It's not a lot of money. So in overall scheme of things, I mean, the Scottish government's spending 300 million on these 2 ferries at Ferguson. So you could build a gateway seaport and then run tenders. They can run a tender to actually operate it, but it could still be publicly owned with a public port authority running that terminal. And most of the money going into the public domain, as it were, and then handling cruise ships and ferries, but with a private concession. And that, to me, is the optimal. I mean, I've only been studying ports for 40-odd years, and I used to work in shipping in Leith. So when I was working in shipping in Leith in the 70s and 80s, we were crying out for a new port because I was a ship agent. We couldn't bring the cruise ships into Leith even then. So it was a disaster, and we were losing all our ferry traffic to Hull and Dover. And the reason why is we weren't investing in a new facility. So what the Tories did was they just simply sold off the ports to the real estate guys, and they've ended up in the private equity world. And the private equity world are just going to trade them on to other private equity groups once they find they can't make enough money out of them.
Yeah, that's why I ask about nationalisation. But But, you know, it's one thing. But Douglas, as you're putting on another, or balance 2 hats here, if you may, for me, on your small business enterprise and innovation. With Brexit going on just now, and there's talk of France and the EU in particular starting a trade war with the UK, which just is frightening. But for any particular reason, strategically, all that they have to do is to block the southern ports, the channel ports, and this country or the UK collapses. Would it not be sensible, if it was a business, and you're talking from a business point of view, to have more than one port? We should have ports down the East Coast that can't sort of cripple us as much, and the West Coast. Would it not be a good idea strategically?
Well, absolutely, and I think it's that level of investment that's required. I mean, I'm pushing for that ferry service that gives us that level of resilience as well. Mm-hmm. I think we've all been to supermarkets over the last few months and seen the empty shelves and all the rest of it. Maybe some of it's to do with COVID, but most of it is to do with Brexit. Yeah. And there's no guarantee that the relationship between the UK and the rest of Europe, the EU, will get any easier in the coming months. So, it could be that we're this is just a constant battle that we have over the next few years. It's Boris continues to sabre battle across to our nearest neighbours. But I mean, in terms of the ferry service from Rosyth, for example, we've also seen all the issues with HGV lorry drivers, and we've just come through the COP26 discussions in Glasgow. Surely the idea should be to take as many road miles and for big lorries off the road as we possibly can, and get it onto a much more environmentally sustainable footing. And one of the ways we can do that is by using our maritime facilities to actually get them onto big ships and move either our exports or imports back and forward between here and Europe. And the way that the maritime industry is going, I mean, a lot of them still using, fairly dirty fuels and things like that. But that's changing as well. They're going down either like a liquid gas route, or it's in the fullness of time. I'm sure we're not that far away from having hydrogen ships.
Yeah.
So there's lots of opportunities out there, not just in terms of running the ferry service, but also being at the cutting edge of that kind of technology, where Scotland can actually build some of these ships or retrofit existing ships that are currently plying up and down the east coast of Scotland, or passing our doorstep on their way north. And that's another thing that I think that ALF has tried to promote as well. The fact, like a transshipment hub that we could have in the Northern Isles, or near Shetland, or somewhere like that, where that's a whole new market that's opening up, and it's an unfortunate offshoot of climate change. If that northern passage beyond the north of Russia, for example, opens up, it could be there's quite a lot of maritime traffic heading in that direction, and we're ideally placed, I think, to take advantage of that. But I think from my point of view, ALF has been probably pushing that particular argument for a long time, as well as the idea around Crockenzie. So I just see lots and lots of opportunities if we get our policy right. What I'm concerned at the moment is, unless you've got the policy in place and a really ambitious maritime policy, then I think opportunities are just going to pass us by.
Yeah, Alf, if I could come to you in this. I mean, obviously, the East Coast, from our point of view, is closer to our European friends and the Baltic, etc. But in the West Coast, am I right in? I mean, that's where the cruise ships come into Greenock, for example, and down at Hunterston, because it's a 24-hour, and that's why they like the nuclear submarines down there, because they can go under right away because it's such deep water in the West Coast. Is there scope there for reopening ports or improving ports?
Yeah, I've been involved in studies to look at that, and that it's come up with very positive results. The problem we have is that we always run up against the same problem, Roddy. Not having independence, we can't do these things because the civil servants always block it. Now, the civil servants, if you ask them why they don't support ferry services from Scotland to the continent, they'll say they won't intervene in the market. Now, this is completely different from, I worked to help develop the European Commission's Motorways of the Sea policy, which is about intervening in the market. And it goes back to what Douglas was saying. We have a distorted market. The roads in the UK are provided free to trucks, basically. But there's no free highway across the sea. You've got to help support that. And that's what the European Commission's Motorway of the Sea policy is about. So there's a new service starting shortly from Sweden to Germany. And what they've done is they're subsidising every truck that's moving by sea. They're giving it what's called an eco bonus. The Italians have been doing this for 20 years. The Spanish have been doing it as well. These services you probably know about from Barcelona to Civitavecchia and Genova. I worked on the Barcelona-Genova Motorway of the Sea route. But the Spanish have been doing this for years. In fact, I had a guy from the Spanish ministry who did his PhD with me under me at Napier, and his PhD was on motorways of the sea policy.
Yeah.
And the Spanish practically drew up the whole policy. And they've got motorways of the sea services now to the UK, from Santander to France, to Ireland, to Italy, and so on. So, and you can also develop these motorways of the sea with subsidy to nearby non-European countries, neighbouring countries. So there's nothing to stop us doing this. What stops us is the civil servants in Edinburgh take the same line as the DFT, the Department for Transport in Marston Street, London, which is we will not intervene in markets, in the shipping markets.
Except when it suits them.
Well, yeah, they're quite content, of course, to get all Scotland's traffic going down to Dover and Hull.
Yeah, I think
they won't intervene in the market, but what we need to do, we could intervene in the market, but we'd probably need independence to do that. We won't get that with British civil servants sitting in Edinburgh telling us we can't do it.
Correct. I think everyone on this programme, or anyone's ever on this programme, we all agree about the independence thing. But we are where we are. Let me ask you another question here, Douglas, if I may, slightly off topic a bit. Again, from the business.
Have you got me worried now?
No. This is about ferries. If you take the West Coast, for example, our businesses, our exporters are really taking a battering because of what's happening in the southern ports. From a legal point of view, could we not speak to our Irish friends and say, listen, can you not send one of these ferries across here to Greenock and pick up some stuff for us on your way to France? I mean, I don't know. Would that be allowed, or would that be forbidden?
Well, it's if there's a market there for it, then it can be done. I don't see any issue with that. Obviously, you're now entering the realm of having border controls and all sorts of things like that, and because it's obviously Ireland or Republic of Ireland are still in the very much in the EU, and I think it's just been shown over the last year or so just the influence a small country can have in the biggest market in the world, almost, in terms of accessing the European market. But I think if there's a market there and people can make that profitable, then I'm sure that's something that we look at. But a few months ago there was very few ferry services between Republic of Ireland and mainland Europe, and the bridge was, if you like, through the English ports. But all that's been thrown out the window. It's
good old Irish.
I think we're up to, what was it, 21 different services or 21 different sailings every week.
I think it's 40. I think I heard it was about 41 or something like that.
Well, yeah, you're probably more up in the numbers than I am at the moment, because it keeps changing. But it's on an upward trajectory.
Absolutely.
And we're struggling to have one ferry service running from a fairly small port in Scotland into Europe. So what we're finding, though, in the whether it's an East Coast port or West Coast port, we need that level of investment in our maritime sector, and I think that the reaction we've had in terms of Rosyth from hauliers and, to be honest, from people in Europe. I'm constantly speaking to the Port of Zeebrugge, who have now joined forces with the Port of Antwerp. So they've got two publicly owned ports that are actually working together. And between Antwerp and Zeebrugge, they're going to. That's a pretty massive operation in terms of moving goods. But when I'm speaking to the Port of Zeebrugge, I'm also speaking to the Mayor of Bruges, because he's the chair of the Port Authority. We don't have anything like that level of control in Scotland. And I know Charles Hammond, who's the chairman of Forth Ports, but beyond that, I couldn't really tell you who owns, who's on the board of Forth Ports. I don't know anybody in the board of Forth Ports apart from the chair, and that's only because he's fairly local to this area. But it's that level of control, that level of influence that we don't have in Scotland, that other places just take for granted. And it'd be nice to get back to that sort of level of involvement for that would be in the interest of the Scottish public and the Scottish citizen.
And the business, and our business, our exporters as well.
And absolutely, exporters, and I think, both ends, as I said, our hauliers here and our exporters here, and the ports in Belgium are crying out for this service to be reinstated, and I can understand why. But
Alpha, if I could just ask you, we're coming towards the end here, gentlemen, but I could ask you, if Douglas can get the Scottish Government to buy into this and go for it, how quick, they said you right, Alf, get this thing going, how quick could we get, for example, Cockenzie into a state where we could turn it into a terminal, or Rosyth, get it fixed so that we could use it?
Well, Rosyth's pretty much ready to go because the ferry terminal's there. But as I say, it's not the optimal location, but it's in Douglas's constituency or nearby, so he will obviously argue for that. But the way to do it is quite easy to tender for a ferry service. That's what the motorways of the sea policy the Commission brought forward is about. You just tender a ferry service. That can be done within 6 months. You can select an operator, and if you provide some funding for them, they'll come and do it. But you need good port facilities. You need a long-term arrangement. You need a good system. And if we don't have, if part of the system is weak, for example, the port facility or the port charges, it won't be sustainable in the long run, and that's the problem. The maritime policy paper that Roy Peterson and I did for the SNP 3 years ago, that's still sitting on a shelf. It was passed by an SNP conference to be implemented. It's never been implemented by the SNP. It could have been implemented by them. They would have to convince their civil servants to work for them for a change rather than work against them. That could be done, but they need to have some commitment. I'm talking at ministerial level. Ivan McKee could do all this if he wanted to, and if he could push his civil servants into delivering. But in all likelihood, they're likely to deliver the wrong kind of solution, and that's a worry as well. So there's a lot in this. But essentially, all these agreements we had historically, whether it's the UK Union or the European Union, they're all about trade. They're essentially about trade agreements. And what we've not done in Scotland is modernise our seaports and modernise our shipping connections. So we're sitting here at the end of England's supply chain up the M6 and the West Coast Main Line, and that's us. And that's why our trade's knackered. We're not connected. And most of our trade is oriented to supply in England and getting sourced from England. Ireland's gone completely opposite. Now they are getting towards 60% trade with Europe, 40% with England. We're the other way around, big time. So we're at the end of England's supply chain. And we're also supplying most goods that we produce to England. We need that direct ferry service. And we needed it yesterday. And we could have had it done. And that maritime policy that we produced should have been implemented a couple of years ago in anticipation of Brexit. But the SNP, politicians, Douglas is maybe an exception on the fourth, but politicians don't talk about ports. And Douglas has mentioned this, it's about ownership as well. The politicians haven't owned the ports in Scotland since privatisation. Whereas if you go to Zeebrugge, Antwerp, Hamburg, Amsterdam, it's the mayor. It's the mayor that runs the port. And it's his department that is the port authority. And that's where they make the wealth of the city from the trade and from the shipping. And they create all the jobs through that. What we've done is we've given it to offshore equity funds, which Mr. Hammond is the front of that, but they do nothing for investment. They won't invest. They'll wait in the public sector to invest. They'll just take profits. They'll tax every ship that comes into the estuary. They'll tax. And that's just discouraging trade. And they chased away superfast through that charging regime and not giving them what they needed. So we have to be conscious that we don't have the right model yet. We need to sort out the whole system. And it starts with the civil servants, really, and the policy that's still getting fed up from London. We're still getting London's policy on maritime, no intervention. And we need to change that.
Well, I've got a solution for that. It's called independence. What do you think? I think it's a great idea. I think it'll catch on. Douglas, last question, if I can, to you. How do you think, is the Scottish Government, do you think, likely to give you backing in this? Is there anything that we, the public, can do, anything you can do, you think, to get them to get this on the radar?
Well, can I just start by saying, I think if we get one ferry service off the ground, I think there's an opportunity to, people will see the success of that, and what we could end up with is like, certainly for trade with Europe, more of a hub facility in the Forth. And I wouldn't be averse to the suggestion that's been made about Cockenzie. I mean, I think for us, the bridges are a bit of a barrier when it comes to bigger ships. But Rosyth is what we've got just now. So until there's something better comes along, then that's basically like Rosyth Zeebrugge is our best bet. Right. But in terms of the Scottish Government, I'm aware of the Roy Pearson and Alf Baird report. In fact, it was Alf who got me started on this when he was still at Napier many years ago. And I think if it hadn't been for Alf's report at that time, then we wouldn't have had even the superfast ferry, and that acted as a catalyst, I think, to actually have that discussion publicly about having a direct ferry service into Europe. But I think the Scottish Government always said that if a feasible business plan that they've got to put on the table, and I think we now have one, and we're working as hard as we can behind the scenes to try and make that happen. As I said, I've actually got a guy who approached me a few years ago, who's actually his current job is running the Brexit buster ferries in Ireland, and his business plan and so on is now being taken seriously, I think, by both investors and the two ports involved at either end of the route. So I'm hopeful at the moment that we can bring the Scottish Government ministers to the table as well, and their civil servants, and actually get this service reinstated, and then think about how make a success of it, how do we take it on to actually have that service. Maybe I get emails every day of the week saying, can we have a ferry service into Norway? Can we have one to Denmark? Can we have one to the Baltics? There's a great interest in the people of Scotland to make these connections. And I think once we make a success of one, then I think there'll be other services and other operators will see the opportunity to actually bring ferry services, into Cockenzie to the Baltics would be fantastic. In terms of some of the activity we could generate through that, and it's actually a way of boosting our exports and boosting our economy. That's
and creating jobs as well. A lot of jobs.
It's not about moving boxes from one place to another. Yeah. It's what's in the boxes and what we can do to create jobs back here as well and support our economy.
Yep. So for the Zeebrugge, last question, the Zeebrugge, what sort of timescales, if everything goes the way you like, Douglas, and you get a fair wind?
Well, I know that everybody's in fairly deep discussions at the moment, and it's all about numbers. So until the numbers are sorted, then I wouldn't like to say any more than that. But I don't think we're very far away from actually having something on the table that will be taken to Scottish Government and say, well, how can you help us with this? And I'm not suggesting that it's a direct subsidy. I think there's other ways that the Scottish Government can become involved, I think that's the way forward. But as I say, I think it's at a pretty crucial point at the moment, and I don't want to say anything out of turn that would scupper a deal or anything like that. But I think there's things are moving in the right direction. So I'm just sort of fingers crossed that something is offing.
When it happens, you can maybe come back and tell us, and we'll do it now. Alf, you and I have been trying for ages to talk about ferries. We never seem to get to ferries. But so all that means is I've got to have you back to talk about actually ferries and how they get built and what we do. So we've been trying for 4 programmes now, Alf. Maybe the next one we'll get on that.
No, you never know, Roddy.
It's always a pleasure to see you, never a chore. Douglas and Alf, can I thank you very, very much for taking time out your busy schedules to join us here and through a Scottish Prism. And I'm actually going up to Dunfermline next weekend, so if I see you in any of the pubs, I'll buy you a beer.
That'd be kind, sir. I will take you up on that offer. live on radio. So there you are.
Yeah. Well, what I'll do is I'll maybe ask you. You can tell me a good curry shop when I'm up.
Right. Oh no. Yeah,
well, I'll private message you for that, and a good fish and chip shop. Anyway, gentlemen,
right.
Thank you very much indeed for your time, and I'll see you both very soon.
Thanks, Roddy.
Okay. You take care, Roddy.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Well, folks, I hope you enjoyed that. I did. Two very interesting men and a very interesting topic. And to help me discuss that and a few other things, I am joined by two of my compadres. I was going to say the Paisley Mohawk, but he's not. He's the flamboyant Floridian at the moment, because he's over there in sunny Florida, none other than Iain Lawson. And the SNP's very own Phil Boswell, calling in from India. So we've got a very international, see, we're talking about international trading and ferries and whatnot. And here we've got you in Florida, we've got Phil in India, and me here in Catalonia. What's not to like? How are you, gentlemen?
Very well.
Good. And is the weather in Florida suiting you, Iain?
Very much so, yes. Yeah, I was very interested in what they both had to say there. I mean,
It would, yeah.
It's not news to Alf, because I know Alf knows all about this, but when Estonia got its independence, one of the absolute top priorities was creating a new port, because they recognised the value added that comes from having a good, hard-working port. And they created a port called Mugla. And it has consistently expanded since it was first opened, and it's now a very key port in the Baltics, thanks to the foresight of the first Estonian government. People watching this programme might remember before COP26 started, a large cruise liner sailed up the Clyde to provide accommodation. If they looked at the name on the side of that cruise liner, it read Tallink, and it was one of quite a large fleet of ferries and cruise ships operated by that Estonian company. So, you know, there is great evidence. It's not rocket science, this. Countries, small countries, know the importance of links, and that's how you build your exports. That's how you defend your trade. And Scotland's got a great export record. So it's an absolute disgrace to look at these oceans with no little dots going across them, showing the contact point. It's deliberate Westminster policy. They want to force all Scottish businesses to go through England so they get their cut before it gets anywhere else.
Yeah.
And it's not good enough to say there's nothing we can do. We can have innovative taxes. What I believe we need in Scotland is an infrastructure underutilisation tax, where we go to these hedge funds and the rest, these people that are holding us back, and we tell them what they've got to do not to attract that tax. And we give them a time period to do it. You know, we should
like 20 minutes.
we should not be sitting about letting this go on year after year, because it's costing our economy dear.
Yeah, it is quite worrying, Phil, isn't it, that private equity companies control Scottish ports. That it's been sold off to spivs who are only interested in making a fast buck. No, they don't invest. They asset strip and just extract as much money as they can.
Yeah, it's appalling, but not entirely unexpected. I actually worked at Rosyth, so I know the full potential at Rosyth quite some time ago. And Babcock were running it, and we were still refitting. I did the refurb, or the estimate for the refurb of Ark Royal before she was decommissioned. But it's a fantastic facility. It's quite an incredible facility. But if you listen to Alf, Cackenzie's the one, you know. But it's not just for what the guys were talking about on business. It's the oil and gas industry. As we move round, we're around about midnight in the exploration process for oil and gas, and we're west of Shetland just now. We're moving round to the west coast to deeper and rougher seas in the North Atlantic, and we need a port on the west coast as well for the oil and gas service industry. So what we really need is it's a major port on the west coast with the M8 link, extend it, the bypass out to Cockenzie, and we are connected Ireland and ships from the west, and that, I mean, some fantastic points. I mean, that's what we want. Again, the kind of expert we want to be listening to. Alf, and a fully engaged politician. You know, we need more of this type of stuff. Douglas has always been excellent. He was very good from the very start when we went down to Westminster. A guy that's passionate about his constituency and knows his brief. These are the kind of people who should be given the reins and given the support and allowed to develop. And the sad thing, all of these initiatives end in disappointment. It's about time we changed that story. And as everybody said, independence is the only way we can do that.
Yep, I mean, Hunterston, for example, you're talking about the West Coast. I remember because when we had the iron ore place down there, it's a 24/7 port. You don't have to. It's not tidal. Unlike in the Channel ports where they've got to wait in tides to get in and out as well. It's just quite ridiculous. But hopefully Douglas gets that through, and the SNP, Scottish Government, carry it forward, because it's essential for our economy. But guys, we're not just going to talk about it. There's been a lot happening this week as well, as always. And that's why you're here. Now, I know you've been in Florida for a couple of days, but I'm sure you've been keeping up to date with things, Iain, while you've been there. One of the first things I want to talk about, actually, is the Nationality Bill, which went through the House of Parliament yesterday. And if I could just read to you, I've got this written down so I don't get it wrong. Clause 9 is a notice of decision to deprive a person of their citizenship, and it exempts the government from having to give notice to the person who they're about to remove the citizenship of. And it puts the power of all people, would you believe, into Priti Patel. So, I mean, we could be viewed as terrorists and undesirables, and certainly you wouldn't be able to go to Florida, Iain, because they take your citizenship and passport away and make you stateless, and you don't even know till you get to Glasgow Airport and they go, "No, I'm sorry, mate, you're stateless." It's we're getting more autocratic as every day goes by with this Tory government.
Yeah, and it's not just them. I mean, what I'm going to be writing about next week in my blog would probably encourage Nicola to try and take my citizenship away as well. But I mean, the freedoms in our country in general, every freedom you can think of, is under sustained attack at the moment. Mm-hmm. We're very, very close to having fascist governments in both Holyrood and Westminster. And they're corrupt governments, particularly the Westminster one, where they've just given up and trying to hide the corruption. They do it blatantly, quite openly. I suggest anybody that wants to dispute that buys, a copy of Private Eye every month or every 2 weeks. It's full of stories of utter corruption and nobody doing anything to stop it.
Yeah. While there's this dispute on the independence movement in Scotland still there, not going away. There's a lot of discontent, Phil. Wales is starting to get a wee bit restless too. So what does Westminster do? They gerrymander Westminster even further. They're removing 8 constituencies from Wales.
Yes.
And 2 constituencies from Scotland, and giving England 10 more to make it an even more imbalanced union. That doesn't strike me as someone who wants to preserve the union. They're just literally Scotland and Wales.
That's exactly what it is, and it's no coincidence. Following on from what Iain was saying, you lump all of this together, you look at the Nationality Bill, you look at the hobbling of the Electoral Commission, you take the 10 English constituencies increase and reduction of 8 and 2, and as if we needed it. It's plain evidence, should anyone wish to see, that they are preparing for political war. They are running through the preparations to steamroller any dissent, completely control us as we move further and further to the right. And therefore, for me, it's more evidence, should we need it, that we must not and cannot engage in another referendum on their terms. Because they're gerrymandering the position, the laws, the regulations, the balance, the rules. They just change the rules. I mean, so no to a referendum, yes to abstentionism, and let's just declare independence and go for it, boys.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, what they're saying with the Electoral Commission, if the Electoral Commission come out with anything that they don't like, that it firstly has to go to Michael Gove to decide if the Tory government have done something wrong. Now, This strikes me like the mafia being put in charge of the courts and choosing the juries. It's quite ridiculous, is it not? No, it's so ridiculous. Ian's saying nothing.
Oh, I'll say plenty about it. I mean, but none of this is new. This has been going on consistently for years, bit by bit, gradually taking control away, running down. I mean, look at the powers they're planning to take from the Scottish Parliament. And they're going to operate these powers for 7 years. They say at the end of the 7 years, they'll give us the powers back. But by that time, you might have GM crops, you might have fracking. There's a whole host of very unpleasant things that they'll be free to introduce. And Nicola's sitting there saying, time's on our side. Who are you kidding, Nicola? Time has never been on Scotland's side, and it most certainly isn't on our side at the moment. And it's completely foolhardy and ridiculous to say something like that when you're supposed to be arguing for independence. Independence has never been more urgent than it is at the present time. And yet we've got a government who are running in the opposite direction. And even if they were to get gold standard referendum, they've done nothing to sort out the franchise, which means we'd probably lose. And then it would be gone for generations. We'd be finished. We've got the wrong people in charge, and I say it every week, we need to get rid of them by whatever means.
Well, it brings me nicely on, because with my two earlier guests were saying, we've got great potential with our ports full. Our exporters are crying out for it will create jobs, but the British civil service are against it and they're holding us back. The British Home Secretary has brought in a law where they can take away our nationality and make us stateless people if we upset the Tory government. If they try and gerrymander the Electoral Commission, they can just say, nah, it's not. We don't agree with that. We've seen all the corruption. And yet, as Iain points out, we're nowhere nearer independence than we were in September the 19th, 2014. And it brings me to this. We just finished COP26. What benefit did Scotland and its independence get out of that, Phil?
It's hard to say. I mean, we did get a wee bit of profile, or the First Minister got a fair bit of a profile with selfies and such like. But that doesn't cut it. We've lost 120,000 oil and gas jobs since 2014. 120,000. And we are now in a situation where time is not on our side. This is 7 years since, I'm sorry, but Nicola was handed the golden goose. The situation was ideal. It could not have went better. I was so excited when Nicola was handed the keys, and I thought this is going to be wonderful. She's going to rock right through, and she might even surpass Alex, who was phenomenal. But to be in a situation 7 years later when we're now saying, oh, maybe it's in 2 years, when the poverty is on the increase, jobs are in decline, we've been dragged out of Europe again. I mean, the list just goes on and on and on. So, no. What did we get out of COP? Precious little. We might sell a wee bit more iron brew, but that's about it.
Can you think of anything better, Iain? Is that it? Some iron brew sales, maybe?
No, well,
15 minutes of fame.
Strangely enough, when I went to get my COVID test to come to the USA, they were wanting to charge me £150 each for a PCR at Glasgow Airport to get the result in 12 hours. And fortunately, they didn't have any slots because everyone from COP26 was going home and they all required tests before they got on the plane. So I had to go elsewhere to get the test that I needed, and it was only £50 each there. So COP26 saved me £200, so I can claim to be one of the few people in Scotland that benefited from them all going home.
But while we're talking about this, and we need the civil servants, and we need the Scottish Government to open up ports, to create jobs, to help our exporters, to help our economy, they're busy playing internal politics. Now, this week, the biggest story, I think, out of Scotland is the attacks on your ex-colleague, Phil, Joanna Cherry. It's now open season on Joanna Cherry, who, now you've worked with the lady. She comes across as one of the brightest and the best. And what I find quite disturbing is that her so-called colleagues in Westminster have signed, a lot of them have signed up to have the whip removed from her, and the rest of them are sitting silent. Do you not find that disturbing, even as an ex-MP?
I can't stress the seriousness of this situation enough. There were 4 points when you mentioned you wanted to talk about it, and I thought, we have to talk about this. We have to talk about this. The first point, I saw the letter, okay, sent to the government from 8 MPs on banning conversion therapy. Now, all but one are gay and childless, I believe. What do they know about bringing up kids, yet deem themselves qualified to dictate to us how we bring up our children? And I have to be blunt about this because it's very serious. There's a few more points. Not a psychologist or doctor among them, you know. And how can you know the difference? How can they know the difference between talking therapies? I was patron of Chris's House, right, a suicide charity, and the amount of therapies that are used for people in trouble, whatever works, whatever the experts can use to help the poor soul in need, and that includes these transgender kids. You know, we're not trying to be tough on them. These people are not qualified to know the difference between talking therapies and conversion therapies. They should know better and leave such things to the expert. Second point, the public pile-on in social media after Joanna has suffered criminal abuse, and in the light of Joe Cox and the recent murder of David Amos, is so irresponsible and so reckless. They really need to have a good look at themselves, retract what they've said, and the Scottish Government should come down hard on them. You cannot get angry enough about this. They're putting her life at risk. This woman who's had the courage to stand up for what she believes in a society where we should be free to speak the truth. Freedom of speech is everything our whole civilization is based on. Third point, who's attacking? SNP students, youth wing, young angry people stamping their tiny feet and demanding action. I mean, it's like the children's crusade all over again. You know, the grown-ups have backed off because they know it's toxic. And why do we send kids to war? Because they're the only ones gullible enough to swallow the crap and go and kill for your flag and queen. And the real question is, who's pulling the strings? Because these children are not our enemies. It's our children that are being used and abused in this mission. Our children who've been educated this way and pushed into the front line, while the generals at the back push more and more of them into the front. No, it makes me really... They're getting played, and they're just not experienced smart enough so to know it. Then, so the virtue signalling thing, it just makes me really angry. And the final part is the governance issue, and this I did a wee bit of work on, because the code of conduct for members, okay, is there's in fact I've got it here in front of me. It's section 2, the SNP conduct standards 1 to 15. Pertinent are sections 1, 2, 4, 7, and 8. And what it says in the code of conduct for members, which I believe this is up online in the SNP website, it's still there. Conversion therapy is in the manifesto, okay? So let's be clear about that. Second thing we need to be clear about, it's in the manifesto, but I'm paraphrasing here from memory. If the UK government doesn't ban conversion therapy, we will do something about it. We will deal with it. That's in the SNP manifesto. Okay, but every member, number one, has a duty to the party to abide by its constitutionally laid down policy and direction. Now, I'm not a lawyer, but this is what I do. I'm dispute resolution. Has this policy and direction been laid down constitutionally? is the
No.
first question.
No, it hasn't.
Okay, now, and that to me is passed by conference. And along with GRA and along with hate crime, the answer to that is no. The second point in conduct standard, a member shall not disavow the aims of the party. That's fine. So I'm testing, I'm being devil's advocate here. Has Joanna disavowed the aims of the party? Well, how loose do you want to be with the definition of aims? Because if it's constitutionally laid down, then she possibly has. But if it's not constitutionally laid down, then, and these are just some questions. I'm not the lawyer that you would engage, because I'm not a lawyer. I mean, going to number 4, it reiterates constitutionally laid down policy. But the key, this is the key one for me, 7 and 8, right? 7 and 8 in the SNP conduct standards, verbatim. Number 7, no member may make malicious allegations of illegal or improper conduct against any other member or maliciously cause to be reported or published in the media the fact that an allegation of illegal or improper conduct by a member is known to have been made. That's number 7. Number 8, no member shall abuse, harass, or bully or maliciously defame any other member, whether via the media or otherwise. Seriously, people? You want to have a look at what you've done? I won't say any more.
Yeah, well, Iain, Phil's hit a real point. This has not been passed at conference. Conference is the ultimate ruler of the party. You know the Constitution better than most of us. And none of this has been in front of the conference. It's not policy.
No, it's not policy at all. It's not. Never has been. It's like GRA and the hate crime bill. None of this has went anywhere near an SNP conference. And the reason for that is, of course, no SNP conference would ever pass it, which is why it's never been there. So I was interested in the point about, being against the aims of the party. As I recall, unless it's changed, it used to be a 2-clause aims of the party. One was the independence of Scotland, and the second was the furtherance of all Scottish interests.
Yeah.
Right? How could anyone accuse Joanna Cherry of breaking either of these aims? Quite possible. I mean, she's done more to defend Scotland than any other SNP MP. For sure, absolutely. I mean, she won a huge court case that had massive implications. She speaks constantly and knowledgeably on Scottish law in particular, again in the defence of Scottish interests. It's quite preposterous. And it comes from these, I've got to watch my language here, just absolute juvenile
delinquents.
Yeah, delinquents, whatever you want to call them. I'm really struggling to keep it civilised, but they have done nothing. And they're turning around and lecturing someone like Joanna Cherry, who has massive achievement on her side. And, they think they can get away with it. And
they can't.
The rules that Phil just read out there, they are all guilty of them, much more than Joanna Cherry.
Yeah, but there's two things.
The old story, there's one rule for some and no rules for the
Yeah, just to come back, a couple of things on that. One, it shows that these youngsters, these whippersnappers, don't know the Constitution when they've written this thing, which is unconstitutional. And their move to get rid of Joanna is unconstitutional because, as we've pointed out, this has not been through conference. Conference hasn't rubber stamped it. So till they do that, you're not. There's no link. But what's more distressing for me is the 8 members of Parliament, apparently adults, have signed up to it, and it's unconstitutional what they're signing up to. I mean, that's the level of people we've got who are telling the rest of us we're anti-independence. It's quite bizarre, Iain.
Well, I mean, they're basically wanting to run their party, but their party isn't a party of independence. Their party's, biology deniers. That's the key issue for them. If you're not willing to go along with their bizarre biology, thoughts, anti-biology thoughts, then you are there to be attacked, there to be bullied, there to be cajoled, And what really gets me is, I'm angry at these people, of course I am. But what really gets me is that the loads and loads of really decent people that I know in the SNP who know how terribly wrong this is and who sit there silently and let it happen.
Yeah,
it's quite disgraceful. And a lot of people have went down in my estimation because of it. Yeah. And I still hope to this day, they've got a conference coming up next week. For goodness sake, some of you stand up. Please. Some of you do the decent thing. Some of you tell them enough's enough, we're having no more. Because that's what Scotland needs. And if you want to help Scotland, you've got to say it. You are the key people.
Just to finish off, Phil, because we've come to the end of our time, which always is never long enough. Iain's absolutely right. Nicola Sturgeon could stop this in 1 minute. One, her to get up and say, this has got to stop. I don't want to say bullying on either side is wrong. You must stop abusing. Joanna Cherry, that she supports what they're doing. That is a tragedy.
Well, that silence is beginning to have repercussions. When you look at the statement from the Indian Council of Scotland today on Facebook, withdrawing support for the SNP, which is a huge blow. And it should concern Nicola, given the numbers of Asians in her constituency. You know, and Asian support. The Asian community has been wonderful in support of independence. They are people who have had to up sticks and travel across the world to benefit, their families and their come to another country and work hand, and they realise the value of the freedom and the rights to make your own decisions. So to lose that kind of core support, this is costing. It's not just costing Nicola; it's costing our cause. The fractions, the division, the hate. It's all so unnecessary to promote someone's idea. I mean, this is worrying about. This is dancing about the handbags. It's the minutiae. This is the problem when you're dealing with our Scottish government is behaving exactly as you would expect, sadly, of a regional council, of a regional authority. It's working on the things it thinks it has some control over, and not behaving as if we're already an independent country, which is how you become an independent country. You start behaving like that. You start being adult and grown up and deal with these difficult issues. Get on with it. Let's do it. We don't have time.
Just before I go, on Radio 4 this morning, I don't know if you guys will have heard about it, on Radio 4, the leader, the chief executive or whatever it is of Stonewall was on, and what do you call her? Barnett, the girl Barnett, questioned her and said, "Can you change sex?" And after, no. So Stonewall's now come out and said this. Now the Woohoo are not going to be happy. The BBC are now, it seems, going after Stonewall. They've not only kicked him out, it seems now they're going after them. And it just leaves the Scottish government and the Scottish civil service as the only places that seem to be supporting Stonewall. Hopefully that is coming to an end, and that they're going to get booted out and we can get back to some normality. Gentlemen, I can't thank you enough. I know it's very late there in India. Phil, past your bedtime, your beauty sleep.
Aye.
Friday night. Oh, aye. Well, as you can see, I oversleep all the time, Iain. All the time. And you want to get back to your golf? You playing golf today or tomorrow?
No, tomorrow. That's why this was a good day to record, because
get swinging, mate. Keep swinging there. Get that straight down the middle. It's been a pleasure.
I just want to finish with the most bizarre news of the week. Surely was reading that in the Scottish civil service buildings, the Scottish government are planning to put tampon dispensers in the gents' toilet. Unbelievable. I mean, someone should sue them for a waste of public money. Outrageous.
When kids are going hungry. Kids are going hungry.
Yeah, exactly.
Seriously. Jesus.
Yeah. But,
I saw some Americans last night about it, and they just thought, it's the end of the road,
It should be.
Absolutely bizarre.
It's almost like a Monty Python sketch what's going on. But gentlemen, time has gone against us. As always, I'll see you when I see you, speak to you. And for you, my viewers, it's lovely being talking to you. I hope you keep well. Next week, I'm in Dunfermline for the Alapa National Council NEC, and I'm hoping to bring you a live show from there. We'll see if Techie can fix it all up. But until I do see you, take care.
Through a Scottish Prism, the programme that is unapologetically pro-Scottish independence and anti-Westminster rule. Everything we say here is viewed through a Scottish prism. Brought to you by Barhead Boy.